Welcome back to another Boilers Extra. I'm Nathan Baird from the Indianapolis Star.
Sam King from the Journal and Courier.
I was in Oregon on Saturday. Sam was not. I think he probably had a better experience last weekend than I did. It's a long way to go to watch not a very good football game, and Purdue comes out on the losing side 38-21. We're going to talk about Purdue basketball later on in this. We were at practice on Tuesday. Just want to talk about the things that we saw and heard. It's really not that far away that things are going to start ramping up. They're going to be having that Creighton exhibition in not that long, and then the season starts right after that. I've already started seeing places on the schedule where football and basketball start colliding, and a lot of optimism on the basketball side, even with in the post Zach Edey era. Not as much optimism right now in football, but that's where we need to start. A loss, and I did a blog on, or not a blog, but a quick reaction pod that I threw up on my YouTube channel. Look for those links when I send them out on the format formerly known as Twitter, and or you can probably find them by doing a search on YouTube. But to kind of recap that, Sam, as you were watching it from home, what was maybe the thing that stood out to you the most, as because it was a game that, Purdue was kind of just trying to say, all right, the Notre Dame thing happened, whatever. But now you get to go out and sort of restart your season, right? You get to take a new step and say, here's what we really are. And I think in a lot of ways they didn't do that.
Yeah, and when I didn't notice this the last two seasons because I've been at every game, but when you watch it on TV, it is a different perspective. You're also getting feedback from people like Ryan Leaf, who played the game, played in the NFL, and you would assume have a general understanding of what teams are trying to do. The major takeaway was Purdue, and we said this a few weeks ago, is a team that does not have a lot of room for error. And you shot yourself in the foot twice in the first quarter, and then you're right back in the position of you're chasing points, which is not what Purdue wants to be doing early on in games. And who knows if you get a field goal on that drive after the fourth down stop to start the game, or you get the first down there and end up scoring a touchdown, if this is a completely different game. That's all things that we can't project because the way the game played out. But Purdue has to be pretty much error-free and force, Oregon State wanted to run the ball. Purdue allowed that to happen by getting behind and allowing the Beavers to kind of dictate the way that game was played. I think Purdue is a team that needs to get off to a quick start and get into a flow of either back and forth or being ahead and kind of dictating the terms of how the game will go. And so far that hasn't happened the last two games.
What I think is probably most disturbing, if you're a Purdue fan, is you look at Oregon State and they're just not better than Purdue. They're just not. They're certainly not 17 points better than Purdue, even in their home stadium, right? Like on a week-to-week basis, they would be. But the defense steps up for you, gives you the ball in like almost automatic points territory. Certainly after Devin Mockabee rips off a couple runs, you're in very easy field goal range for a field goal kicker who still has not attempted a field goal yet this year. And I've covered some teams where you go maybe 3 games into the year where you haven't attempted a field goal yet, or barely any. But it's because Ohio State was scoring like 9 touchdowns against Akron and 8 against Western Kentucky or whatever. Like these are games where Purdue is just not moving the ball at all and getting into field goal range for the most part. Anyway, so you leave at least 3 points on the field there. And then the other thing that happens is I was glad that we talked to Hudson Card. We asked for him after the game on Saturday. We did not get him after the game on Saturday. He did talk to us on Wednesday after practice. And I thought his perspective was, because I didn't actually realize maybe that ball had been misdirected. The one that was
it was definitely tipped.
Yeah, a swing out to Reggie Love, because he just whiffed at it. And I still think he maybe should have been able to get a hand on it somehow, but it had been redirected. And then it just sort of floated up there, and then it bounces off his ankle. It was just a chain of events that there wasn't even necessarily in that situation. I don't even know that there's necessarily a mistake that Purdue made. And I don't even know that there was necessarily a play that Oregon State made that was so good that it was capitalizing on like there was definitely a swing of luck there.
Right.
And now 7 points goes the other way. But that's where Purdue is at right now. And Ryan Walters has been saying this, and you just said it, that this program, this team is really in a place where anything like that is like a borderline catastrophe. And part of the reason is because they only have half an offense right now. They just literally cannot throw the ball. And it's been sobering, I think, to go through these 3 games and come out of it. And you look at ahead to a week like this, because I think before the season, you would think, okay, they compete with Nebraska, and then like win or lose, that's just the level of team that maybe you're going to compete against, but maybe you come out on the wrong side of it. But now you look at it and it's like, and originally you wouldn't have thought that that's going to matter as far as like dooming the season, because Purdue could win the winnable games. But when you leave a game on the field like you did at Oregon State and miss an opportunity like that, it sort of takes away any positives that you can feel coming out of any loss going forward.
Yeah, that, and I called it in Monday press conferences a fluke play, because in a lot of ways it was. And we need who's the guy who did the sports science show back in the day, the randomness and the spin the ball would have to hit where it did on him. It's not a solid base, and the way it bounced perfectly back to the defensive end, that's just, probably 1 in a million type stuff that right now this seems to be going against Purdue all the time. But you're right. We said before the season, Purdue really needs to come out of these first 3 games 2-1, first 4 games 2-2, and now you're right here where now you have to beat Nebraska for that to happen, which doesn't look like a great possibility based on the way Nebraska's playing, and then based on the way Purdue's playing right now. So I guess right now what you're hoping for is progress, and in a lot of ways there was progress last week, but we talked to Yanni Karloftis on Tuesday, and I said, did this defense get better from Notre Dame to Oregon State? And he even hesitated and was like, I think we got better at some things, but overall probably not. Pretty blunt and realistic, saying, like, we still had guys that were out of position. We still weren't playing with 11 guys going to the football. And those are things that you can't be doing now a month into the season.
So let's kind of break down some categories here. I thought it would be, we've got 3 games now worth of data to better judge what Purdue really is. We try to make your assessments in camp based on what we see, based on interviews we're doing, things that we hear off to the side, like what's really happening. And we thought Purdue would look like X through 3 games, and now it looks like Y, and in some ways. So I thought we should just go through a few categories here, and let's give our assessment here. Was this like conventional wisdom, right, wrong, or is it still TBD? Because I think that's actually a fair answer on a few of these things, even on some things that have not gone in Purdue's way. Let's start. I want to start on defense, actually, because I think there's still bigger concerns on offense in some ways. But so one thing I put here, I think the conventional wisdom was year 2 in Ryan Walters' defensive system, this team would naturally be better just by being in the system for a second year. You'd see maybe a more sophisticated version of the defense that they tried to play last season. So 3 games in, do you think that we were right, wrong, or is that still TBD?
I think it's kind of, in some ways, all 3. Now, Purdue hasn't had Nyland Green, so we'll see. I don't think Nyland Green's going to play every down, but it sounds like he's going to be back, and he's, he was at practice this week in pads going through reps. So that should help. But right now, it's hard to tell because, as Ryan Walters said Monday, Purdue hasn't forced the team to have to pass the ball yet. And that's where this defense really can thrive. So, secondary upgrades are great. Being able to rush the passer is great. But if a team's just, picking up 15 yards on jet sweeps and running options on you all night long, it doesn't matter how good your secondary is and how well you can rush the passer.
I was telling you a story. We were standing by our cars after practice on Wednesday, and I'm going to use it here because I like to use baseball analogies because baseball was like my first sport that I loved. And Ron Santo, Cubs great, used to tell this story in the 60s. They were getting ready to play the Dodgers. They're getting ready to face Sandy Koufax. And somewhere along the season, because he used to play everybody a lot more back then, they picked up that he was tipping his pitches when he came out of the stretch. And so anytime they would get somebody on base and he had to go to the stretch, the way that, and I don't remember the details, was the way he held his glove, the way he bent his arm, the way he did something. I don't remember. They knew what pitch was coming next. Obviously, Sandy Koufax, incredible curveball, good fastball. And if you know that that curveball is coming, that changes the whole complexion of everything. So they go out to LA. I think it was out in LA, like super confident that they're finally going to get to tee off on him. And that would have been a great strategy if they'd ever gotten somebody to first base, but Sandy Koufax threw a perfect game and him tipping the pitches didn't matter. And it's kind of how I feel about this Purdue defense right now, because I think they probably have personnel wise, especially if Nyland Green coming back, upgraded the secondary. I think that because of that upgrade in the secondary and the system itself, and putting someone like KJ Jenkins at Mike linebacker, and he had a couple sacks against Oregon State and showed what he can do from the pass rush at that position. All that together, you can create a good pass rush. But that doesn't mean anything if teams know they literally do not have to throw the ball against you to score 38 points against you and beat you. That's not completely accurate. They did have to throw the ball on that 2-minute drive going into halftime. They had 7 completions on that drive. By the way, that's as many as Purdue had the whole game. But Oregon State only had 3 other completions the whole game. They only had 10 completions. And really, it's so if you take away that, then there's 28 other points because you're also taking off the pick 6. But the team scored 4 touchdowns against you, almost having to not throw the ball at all. And that is it's completely unsustainable. If you're taking the other defense's legs out from underneath it, taking away the thing that it most thrives on, you're not even giving it an opportunity to do that. Not only are you piling up points, you're not putting the other offense on the field, and the offense is the one that really has no margin for error right now. It just can't get out of its own way a lot of the time. And, they were talking this week, Ryan Walters, Kevin Kane, talking about maybe some schematic changes, which I think is both refreshing to hear if you're a fan, but probably still troubling that they got 3 games into this season and into the second season of this system. And I know there's new guys here. There's also a lot of guys that have had for 2 years now and had even assessments on before that from previous film probably. And they're now figuring out that this scheme doesn't work for, it sounds like, multiple guys who are on the field, at least the way they had it set up through 3 games. I think that is a concern. So whatever changes they make this week, you wonder if it's just marginal changes, is that going to make enough difference for a team that right now is just getting absolutely destroyed on the edges and cannot stop the run?
Yeah, I wrote this today. I actually wrote it yesterday. It was published this morning. Purdue statistically has the 3rd best pass defense in the Big Ten. And that's not because the pass defense
by what? By yards per game allowed?
Yes. And because
that doesn't matter at all.
When you look at the rushing yards per game, USC is 17th in an 18-team conference. Purdue is 106 yards per game worse than USC in 18th. So that's a large gap from the 17th to the 18th team. And because of that, rush defense, Purdue is the worst team statistically in the Big Ten by several accounts: points per game, yards per game, whatever measurement you want to take, and probably just by watching the defense play. This is you're right. This is year 2. This is why Ryan Walters got a head coaching job, because this defense was successful at Illinois. The best teams in the Big Ten struggled against it. Now, the secondary at Illinois that year had a bunch of NFL draft picks and, NFL draft picks on the front line there. I think Purdue's got some NFL guys, but probably not, like you said, the right personnel across the board maybe to run this. I did think it was concerning when I brought up to Kevin Kane Monday about the option kind of gashing them. And he said, well, we know that's, a flaw in our system. It's hard to defend the option with the way we run the defense. You're asking somebody to run quite a bit of ways to be that second guy to help out there. And now that that's out there, you're going to see even teams that don't run the option probably have some sort of play design where you can go out there with a quarterback and a pitch man and really cause some problems if Purdue doesn't adjust to it.
Yeah. By the way, Purdue is 78th nationally in opposing quarterback defensive rating. You know what I mean? Like opposing quarterback efficiency rating.
Right.
So very, not even middle of the pack, like not they're in the bottom, like whatever that would be, 30% of college football in that stat, which I think is better than total defense, which can be or just total yards, which can be misleading. I think this is
the point was teams are not having to pass the ball.
Exactly. Yeah, it's more like where do they rank in terms of passing attempts faced? That would be the better gauge, actually. But this is a coaching issue. Like, they can't spend all preseason and all offseason telling us they think they brought in talented guys. I know Nyland Green hadn't played, but he's not the only guy they brought in. They brought in talented guys. That KJ Jenkins' best position is Mike linebacker. That Dylan Thieneman is an All-American, and what he can do at the back end of this defense is only going to be better in his second year. You can't tell us all those things, and the fact that you got the transfers in December being such an advantage over getting them in the spring, and then also say that this system is why Ryan Walters is here. He was basically hired to bring this system here. He keeps himself in as a defensive play caller to call this system because he thinks it's such an asset. You can't get to all that and then say, well, no, we're doing the scheme's right and the players are wrong. Like, no, like you probably don't have this scheme set up to best utilize your talent. There's a misjudgment that has happened somewhere in there. And if there's not a pretty significant alteration quickly, then teams are going to, like, they said it after the Notre Dame game. Was it Dylan Thieneman maybe that told us, like, we know teams are going to just run the plays that Notre Dame hit on against us, so we have to be ready for that. But it was another game where Ryan Walters comes in after the game and says, like, hey, they ran the plays that we knew that they were going to run, and they're still just gashing out yards. And it just, so I don't know if you have to start looking at other personnel, that maybe there are some guys who just had an edge in tenure and experience, and that was giving them a foot up. But if somebody else can come in and actually stop the run and actually hold the edge, they're just still getting just obliterated on the edge. You think anytime the opposing offense gets out on the edge, it's 12 yards. And I just don't know. It's just not sustainable. They're never going to get into what is the strength of their defense. They're going to have to hope that they play a team that is only a passing offense or something. And I think then it brings up the second question I was going to ask, which is, or the second conventional wisdom I was going to have us assess, which is the secondary will be a strength of the defense, that they've added people with Dylan Thieneman already back there, got some guys in their second year, some veterans, even in second year in the system, but even fourth, fifth year in the program or in college football. So the secondary will be a strength of the defense. I think it's very fair to say right now TBD, but I don't think you can say better than TBD. I don't think you can say it's a reality because it just hasn't been proven yet.
Yeah, people right now probably don't remember that this team had Sanusi Kane, who's now playing for the Baltimore Ravens, back there with Dylan Thieneman last season, and Cam Allen, who started for 4 years. And he was, last season was not his best season, but he's a guy who I think is second all time in career interceptions at Purdue, played a lot of games. Even if you're, not maybe the best player in the league at that position, you've played a lot, you have experience, and you're knowledgeable. And so, now you're asking Kendrick Breedlove, who was in a different system last year and a different system the year before that. You're asking Nyland Green, who was at Georgia, which is a great program, but it's not the defense that Purdue runs. You're really kind of leaning on Dylan Thieneman being a sophomore that's grown from a great season a year ago, and from Markevius Brown, who I thought was pretty good last year, but not great. He wasn't an all Big Ten type of player or anything like that. So yeah, in a lot of ways, we don't know right now. Antonio Stevens is a lot of tackles. Is that translating to being an overall great player for the defense? We don't really think the safety should be getting that many tackles. That's a little bit concerning. So it is right now very much undetermined. I think that once we see Nyland Green play a couple games, you can get more of an accurate gauge on that. But how much of this does he erase if you're counting on him being a lockdown corner and teams are still running the ball at will?
By the way, Nyland Green, one of the team's scholar athletes of the week, or whatever they call it, for this week. So good on him.
He came to play school.
Yeah, he did come. Well, I just say, like, I think sometimes it's hard as an athlete when you're hurt and you've got to probably, if physically hurts you, probably just walking around and stuff. It was a foot injury for him, and he's got to go do a lot of rehab and stuff like that. You still have other responsibilities around the team, and you're still doing it in the classroom. So, like, good for him. I asked a bad question of Ryan Walters on Monday. I asked a question where I just kind of gave him the answer, and then he just agreed with it. You're supposed to ask a more open-ended question. I should have asked, what does Nyland Green's attitude potentially mean for this defense? And he might have expounded on that more, because I've been thinking that that's the thing where he can maybe help this defense the most. He played 2 years at Georgia. He was around winning football, period, at Georgia. Like, just one of the best programs in the country right now, if not the best. And he knows what a winning system looks like. He knows what winning approach every week looks like. And he also knows the winning attitude and the aggressive attitude, the confident attitude that you have to take out onto the field. And in almost no way, except maybe running the ball against, we'll talk about this later, the worst run defense in the country. Oregon State is the worst run defense in the country. You have to bake that into how well Purdue ran the ball last week. You have to use that perspective. Yeah. But in almost no other way are you watching a team that's confident right now. The passing game, no confidence. The run defense, like, negative confidence. Like, there's just not confidence right now. And I think what we saw from him in those early weeks of preseason camp, and that's all I can go by. You guys saw him in the spring, but I only saw those. But it jumped out at me the way that he played early in those practices. I mean, we didn't see all practice, but he's just a guy who gets in there and mixes it up and is ready to get physical and play assertive. That's what I saw in practice. Does that translate to the game field? We'll find out. But I thought that that's been a thing that's been missing, and just to get him back in the mix at all could be a boost to a team that maybe needs an example to look to right now.
Yeah, one play that stands out, and I'm sure you'll remember this too. We were standing down in the end zone of an early season camp practice, and the play looked like it was, it's a practice play, and the guy gets big yardage, and they're going to blow the whistle and go back and run the next play. And Nyland Green chases down a receiver and punches the ball out from behind, which is probably something that's standard at Georgia, and at Purdue, maybe, you get lax in situations like that. But at Georgia, if you're lax at all, you're probably not going to play. So that may be, if you see that constantly and then other people start picking up on that and doing the same things, that's how you can kind of elevate your team a little bit.
I think I'm trying to remember if that was the play where then he had to go run, because technically it was after the whistle. Because I asked Ryan Walters later, I was like, hey, why did he have to run for that? And he's like, oh, it would have been a penalty. But I think it was one of those things where you want guys walking that line a little bit. Like, cornerbacks, it's a tricky thing sometimes. Like, you want them being physical, but you don't want them being too handsy that they're getting PIs, and you want them being aggressive against the run, but not so aggressive you're getting penalties there. Like, it's a fine line you have to walk, but it's the fine line that the winning teams in the Big Ten stay on the right side of. So that's what Purdue is trying to decide if it's going to be or not right now. I would call this TBD, but it's one of those things that we might get to November and still say this is TBD if this team doesn't start running the ball or defending the run. Let's talk about offense. I had set aside 3 things that I thought we should reassess. Number 1, Hudson Card will be more efficient, more poised, more dynamic, however you want to say it, in year 2 as a starter. I would say right now, false. I don't have any evidence that he's any better this year than he was last year. And now there are some factors that are affecting that. I don't think we'll talk about that in a little bit, but just in terms of what Hudson Card is doing on the field right now, are you ready to pull the cord on this and bail out, or do you think it's still possible we see that from him, or do you think maybe just based on the Indiana State performance and something else, I don't know what, that it actually has been confirmed?
So last season at Nebraska, Hudson Card had his, by QBR rating, worst game as a Purdue Boilermaker quarterback. And now you're playing Nebraska again. So, I don't know if that translates at all. But after that game, I thought he played decently well at Michigan, which was the best defense in the country last year. And then he had 3 straight games, the Minnesota game, the Indiana game to end last year, and the Indiana State game this year, where those were 3 of his 4 highest rated games in his career. And that gave me after that Indiana State game, not just that Indiana State game, but extrapolating that to how he ended last season once he appeared to come back healthy, gave me reason to believe that, okay, what they're selling us on this, being year 2 in the system and understanding things now and having a better grasp, he's going to be this, NFL possible caliber quarterback that we were told about when they got him out of the transfer portal. And then after the last 2 games, I would be with you. I would say I don't believe that he's going to, even if he does improve, it's not going to be significant enough to where people can say, oh, he's so much better than he was a year ago, because he had some pretty good games last year that because the team was 4-8, people probably don't recall. I thought he was decently productive in the Syracuse game, but Purdue in that game couldn't stop a running quarterback and fumbled the ball a ton of times. He was pretty good. Illinois, everybody looked good that day. He was pretty good against even Fresno State to open the season last year, but Purdue lost, so you kind of get lost in the shuffle. I don't think I'm not going to say he's gotten worse, but he does not look like he, is a guy that, as we were told, was so much more comfortable in the system and was going to come in. And now part of that is because he's been under fire, and we're probably going to get to reasons for that too. But as of right now, I would say that that's not true.
Well, he was under fire against Notre Dame. I did not think he was under fire against Oregon State. And the way that they averaged 8.8 yards a carry and could not counter that with a productive passing game.
Right.
And
yeah, one good pass to Max Clare in the end zone.
Yeah, really, yeah. And it going through 3 quarters, they had 56 yards of passing offense, and 32 of them were on that one completion to Max Clare. For the game, they had, I think it was 9 yards after the catch, and 7 of those came on one catch from Leland Smith, who, by the way, finished the game with 5 yards because he lost 2 yards on his other catch. Like, that is sort of the epitome of the Purdue passing game right now. Hudson Card, at this point, 3 or 4 games in, they've played 3, many other teams have played 4. He ranks 10th in the Big Ten in quarterback efficiency rating, but that Indiana State game is doing some heavy lifting on that stat, because for the season, he has a 63.6% completion percentage rating. He's been at more like 43% total over the past 2 games. That's pretty miserable. And again, against Notre Dame, I thought that it was, he didn't really have much of a chance. They were just in his face. And I know that he lost Edrin, and I know that he lost, I guess we should just transition the next thing before I bring that up. But I just want to say real quick, like, he's 10th right now, and that Indiana State game is doing some heavy lifting. And it's also, though, the scores across the board are going to drop. And if his quarterback efficiency rating gets down into like the 110s, 120s as the season goes along, I don't know how that corresponds to Purdue having maybe even 4 wins again this year. I thought that the passing game had to step up and elevate the offense. It can't just be that this team runs the ball a lot and gets a bunch of running yards because of it, but is still very inefficient with the passing game and not explosive. And this offense becomes very one-dimensional. I don't think that gets you where you want to get. It doesn't get you. It's just every factor I'm kind of looking at it is this better in year 2? That would not be better in year 2. So that kind of leads to the next question I had, which was the conventional wisdom that Purdue is deeper and more talented at receiver. That's actually almost 2 different questions, I suppose. I think they probably are deeper because Jamal Edrin couldn't play at Nebraska and is going to be out 3-4 weeks. CJ Smith still hasn't played and does not sound like he's going to be back on the field very soon. Those 2 guys are, by all accounts, fairly talented guys, at least relative to what Purdue had last season. So probably more talented. Okay, I'll say maybe yes. But if they're hurt, that doesn't matter. And especially if the answer to deeper is no. And I actually think I would say deeper is no. I don't know that you're seeing. I thought against Oregon State, I thought you saw the same limitations from the receiving core that you thought Purdue had last year, right?
Yeah, so if you look at Purdue's top receivers last year, you had a couple of tight ends in that top 10 in terms of receptions, receiving yards. You had a couple of running backs. And then, your top end receiver is Deion Burks, who's now leading Oklahoma in receiving yards and receptions. So clearly, as far as the number 1 receiver, I think Purdue had a much better number 1 overall receiver last year. But he's a guy who, as the season went on, started becoming a focal point, and his production kind of dipped as last year went on. when you look at the others, TJ Sheffield was a guy who had been at Purdue for 5 years, ultimately kind of quit on the team going into the Indiana game. But he was a productive receiver for at least 3 of those seasons. He was a guy that was relied upon quite a bit. And then you had Abdur-Rahman Yassin, who's now at USF, and he was a kind of a guy you could count on a little bit. I don't know that the talent level has dipped, but you've got to be able to get the ball to the guys. Jaden Dixon-Veal was a guy that at the end of last year I thought had some promise coming into this year, that he was going to be a big part of this. Jerron Tibbs, another guy. Now they might be very beneficial moving forward, but so far you haven't been able to get the ball to them. We still, I think the jury's still out on Denial and Morissette, even though he has 2 touchdowns. He hasn't had a big game or anything like that. Shamar Rigby is a guy that we had heard about in camp as a guy that was going to be productive, and I think right now he's got 1 catch in the Indiana State game. So
yeah,
it's a lot of names we're giving you, but not a lot of yards or catches through 3 games.
And now it's a chicken before the egg thing, right? Is it that the passing circumstances, whether it's the play calling, whether it's the structure, I don't know, is so flawed right now that no receiver's having good games. Like Jamal Edrin wasn't having like big games before he got hurt. Or is it because the receiving talent is not separating, not running its routes cleanly and running the right routes? That was definitely the intimation that we got from Graham Harrell this week. And I guess Ryan Walters too, to some extent. And Hudson Card wasn't going to throw anybody under the bus, although he talked about like following the game plan and finer details. But I was definitely hearing from from Graham Harrell, I should say, that he was kind of shifting some blame to like, hey, there's some stuff going on at receiver that is throwing things off. And then that's affecting Hudson's confidence or security on the field. And it's just kind of snowballing. I guess I can understand that explanation, but it is still counter to what I think the coaching staff, and I'm not saying they were blowing smoke, I think they maybe believed it, that this receiving group would be, if they encountered a situation like this, something happens with Jamal Edrin, they knew CJ Smith was going to be hurt to start the year, and they were still talking about, well, we're going to just be able to plow right ahead because of the receiving talent and the depth of receiving talent. And it's for whatever reason, you certainly can't say that it's been confirmed through 3 games. What about the offense? Go ahead.
I had asked, because I just wrote a story before we started recording this podcast. It'll go up, I assume, sometime on Thursday about Cam Brown. So I asked specifically about Cam Brown to Hudson Card on Wednesday, and he said he's a guy that's going to be in the mix, but he's been hurt. Cam Brown had a knee injury in the spring. He slowly, first day of fall camp, we saw him with ice on his leg. He's slowly been integrated. He's played the last 2 games, but not a lot of snaps. He did have the big catch against Notre Dame, but as of right now, that's another name. It's not. He produced at UCLA in the past 3 years and played at Texas A&M before that. But right now, I need to see somebody on the field produce a big game, or at least be a guy that looks like he can be targeted several times throughout the course of a game before I believe that this receiving core is as good and as deep as we've been told.
By the way, UCLA over the past 3 years when he was there did not have some kind of excellent quarterback play, unless I'm forgetting somebody. But they did have Chip Kelly. They did have a legit offensive coordinator and someone who is renowned for how he handles that job. So that might explain why someone at the same talent level is producing. I mean, UCLA is not that great. They're certainly not that great right now. You see what's happened since Chip Kelly left. That might be the worst team in the Big Ten. That might be that Purdue's might be racing against them. That has to be, that's an answer that someone like Graham Harrell has to come up with in his second year. You've got a second-year quarterback. You've got a veteran offensive line. Even if some of them are transfers, you brought them in December for a reason. They should be kind of a cohesive unit by now. You've got obviously talented running backs. I wouldn't go as far as some people are maybe taking it after that Oregon State game, but talented running backs. So why is the passing game absolutely inept? It's on. He's the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. He has to figure that out. I think there's a lot on this coaching staff on both sides of the ball right now. The last one I was going to throw out there was the offensive line is better. We thought that the offensive line, just by virtue of being healthier, is better. Last year's offensive line would have been better if it had just stayed healthy. That has already been an issue because Corey Stewart had to miss some time to start the year, but he was healthy and playing on Saturday. And yes, they ran the ball confidently and successfully against this is not hyperbole. Oregon State is the worst power conference run defense. There isn't even, I don't think, a competition. They were 119th in the country coming into that game. Now they're 131st. They're giving up 6.4 yards a carry they've played 4 games. That's miserable. And any team should go in and run the ball exceptionally well against Oregon State. So I give the offensive line, that's going to be something that they build on. You can at least say this, you could probably even, I guess, say some confirmation has been seen, but against Notre Dame, there was no confirmation. Hudson Card was under attack. That offensive line got its butt kicked. So I would still say TBD at best against for this offensive line right now. And it has to step up and show, frankly, against a team like Nebraska that is not a pushover on run defense, that it can still go out and have a productive offense.
Yeah, and I think the offensive line in theory is better because Marcus Bowe is healthy, where last year he missed the second half of the season. Very experienced, but you're right, against Notre Dame, and part of that is just, that was not complimentary football in any way. The defense has to help the offense has to help the defense, and right now I don't think either one of them are helping each other a whole lot. So, you're putting yourself in situations where when Notre Dame can rush 4 or 5 guys consistently, you can't pick all those guys up. But it also seemed like a lot of those guys were getting through untouched. So I don't know that it's hard to gauge, like you said, how good Purdue's rushing game is, because there was nothing to be had against Notre Dame, which is why you were under fire and passing, because you tried to establish a run game early and it just didn't work, and Purdue abandoned it pretty quickly, and then the score got out of hand, and then you have to try to throw the ball. So it is hard to tell right now. I think talent-wise, especially considering all the injuries that Purdue had last year on the offensive line, talent-wise, Purdue's better this year than last year, but it hasn't translated into success. I guess relatively speaking, because you're still losing games and not able to have a lot of offensive consistency.
So we said coming into the season that this was going to be a critical juncture. The Oregon State game coming home to start Big Ten against Nebraska. They lose the Oregon State game. That puts even more focus on this game. If you want to build momentum in a season that has a tough schedule, then Nebraska is still in a tier of teams that you can probably take a swing at. I think we can set aside any notion of massive upsets against the top 10 teams still on this schedule. But someone like Nebraska, there's going to be some volatility in their play. It is their first road game of the season, first road game of Dylan Raiola's career. I know you do the scouting report. I'm going to run through a couple things, and then you can just build off of that. Nebraska's not that special running the ball. So I think Purdue on Saturday needs to show that it is not the defense against which average running games look special. Oregon State, I don't know that they're super talented running the ball. It's just what they do the best. And they were able to do kind of what they wanted against Purdue. Yeah. They have to stop letting that happen, especially if it's against teams that just aren't. Ohio State is averaging 7 yards a carry. Ohio State's going to run for just all the yards, all the yards it wants against Purdue when that game happens later this season, most likely. But against a team like Nebraska, you ought to be able to get in there and mix it up and make them earn it. Now, the problem is, on defense, Nebraska is 24th nationally in yards allowed per carry. They're only allowing 3 yards a carry. And as I said, Oregon State is as bad of a defense as you're going to face as far as stopping the run that anyone's going to face. So what this is where the offensive line has to step up. Does Purdue run the ball well enough to make the defense be on, make the defense, keep the defense honest, and give its passing game a chance to have some success, and also come up with some new ways to run the passing game, because what's been through 3 games hasn't worked, except for against a team that is not in FBS. And the last thing I want to mention, Dylan Raiola, they're not special running the ball. They are potentially special throwing the ball. Kevin Kane was very complimentary of him this week and the kind of things he does. Say he doesn't look like a freshman. I'm a little bit familiar with him because he committed to Ohio State coming out of high school after going to 4 high schools in 4 years. And then he decommitted and went to Nebraska where he had some family connections. Right now, 8.4 yards per attempt, 72.2 completion percentage, and a 162.29 efficiency rating. And I know I get nerdy with that stuff, but it just tells me a whole lot more than just pure yards. I think that I went back and looked. The last time Purdue had a quarterback with those numbers for a season, I expected it to be pretty distant. It was only 2021. Those are basically Aiden O'Connell's 2021 numbers, like almost exactly. A little bit of variance, but almost exactly across the board. Purdue did mention, like I said, it is his first road game. Is there some combination of the crowd and the way that Purdue's defense attacks that can make this an uncomfortable first road game for him? Maybe, but again, if you don't stop the run, you're not going to get that chance. So how do you, I know you've already started doing your scouting report. How do you see this game unfolding?
Yeah, and I've watched some Nebraska games here in the early season, like some of the Colorado game. I recorded and watched back some of the Illinois game. Dylan Raiola he's special. He's going to be an NFL quarterback here in a couple of years. He is susceptible, and maybe this is part of being a freshman and some of the growing pains, to getting sacked or getting himself into situations where you can make him uncomfortable. Now, can Purdue do that to him? In theory, with the pass rush you have and the secondary you have that you've claimed is an upgrade and really good in the strength of this defense, you have to shut down that run. And Kevin Kane did say that the edge is going to look a little bit different this week, which if it's not, we might as well just pack up and go home, because every team's going to run for 250 to 300 yards against Purdue. But I think there is an opportunity here. You get a kid that's, like you said, playing his first road game, and hopefully the environment's hostile. Hard to say now that after the last 2 games that the fans are going to be as in tune with this team as maybe it would have been, because I expect a lot of red to be in Ross-Ade Stadium on Saturday as well, as is the case when these major programs come to West Lafayette. But I do think there's an opportunity here for Purdue to rattle a freshman quarterback and maybe get into that back and forth. I don't think Purdue talent-wise is better across the board, but I think it's somewhat comparable, or it's, maybe 60-40 one way or the other. I think this is a game that Purdue should be able to compete in, even given what we saw last week and what we saw 2 weeks ago. But you have to play mistake-free football on offense, and you have to, I wrote about, kind of how Purdue hasn't forced a turnover, which isn't, when teams are running the ball, it's a little bit harder to force those turnovers. And like Ryan Walters said, when the ball's in the air, that's when it's up for grabs. Otherwise, you're just trying to force fumbles and things like that, and guys are protecting against that happening. But I do think there's an opportunity here to take advantage of some circumstances where this is a special talent, but we've seen a lot of really good freshman quarterbacks go out and have absolute stinkers as well. So I don't know that that's going to be the case, but I think there's an opportunity where Purdue can take advantage of that. The thing that I think is interesting is Zay Nair. I think I'm pronouncing that right. He's a former, strangely enough, former teammate of Hudson Card at Texas. But he's a transfer to Nebraska this year. Didn't do anything really in Texas. It was 1 year last year, and then lit the world on fire before that at Wyoming. But he's been one of the best receivers in the Big Ten early this season, playing for Nebraska. So he's a guy that, when you transfer, you hope that's the kind of production you get. He's got 4 touchdowns, I think, and he's the leading receiver. Part of that's probably the quarterback, but part of that's probably a guy that came in and got into a new environment and is taking advantage of it. It seems like he's a guy, if you can keep him limited or shut him down. And as you mentioned, Nebraska's not great running the ball as of yet. You're going to give yourself a chance.
He did get sacked 6 times against Illinois. He had only been sacked 1 time prior to that in 80 pass attempts. But no, you're right. Like if a quarterback's handing off, where do takeaways happen? Most likely interceptions and strip sacks. Well, if a quarterback's handing off the ball, he's not throwing a forward pass to be intercepted, and he's not going to get sacked. You can't sack him because he doesn't have the ball anymore. So yeah, unless Purdue stops the run, this defense will not have a chance to affect games. So the line on this game, it's been about really hovered around 10 points. Nebraska is a 10-point favorite all week. I'm going to keep my score there, but I'm going to, whatever. This is, I I've even been optimistic in predicting Purdue losses so far this season. I'm going to say Nebraska 30, Purdue 21. Maybe that this is just the kind of opponent that will Nebraska come out and say, well, we know we have Dylan Raiola, but this team can't stop us. We're just going to run the ball. Will it do that, or will it come out and try to just be its conventional offense? And will Purdue have an opportunity to take advantage of that on a couple of occasions? We'll see. I think there's something about coming home, Nebraska going on the road for the first time, all those things. Maybe that's a little bit. So the most optimistic I can get is that I think Purdue might be able to cover a 10-point spread at home against a team that I think is good, but not great. What's your prediction?
Yeah, I'm right there. People don't know this, but we're involved in this. I think you are Media Mania Pick'em Big Ten game thing, and I picked the total points in this game to be 50, and I had it at 30 to 20. So I mean, I'm right there with you, but that I'm also riding right on the line where if I'm gambling on this game, I'm not picking one way or the other. I'm going somewhere else and putting my money on that game. But if that happens, I think we'll be sold after the game from the coaches and the players that, hey, this was progress. Fans aren't going to buy it because you're now 1-3, but that's right now probably your best hope if you don't win the game is at least show that you've got some fight in you, show that you're competitive a little bit. So I think that's what Purdue needs to do first and foremost. And last year going into this game, I talked to Kevin Kane about his pick 6 against Nebraska when he was playing at Kansas. I talked to Ryan Walters, who grew up in the heyday of Nebraska versus Colorado being national powers and hated rivals, and how much he, probably gave him some locker room material saying, I hate everything about Nebraska, even the little N on their helmets. But right now, this is all about Purdue and not about who you're playing. It's just Nebraska happens to be the opponent that's up next that is your chance to prove you're getting better.
During the Jeff Brom era, Purdue, I thought, took advantage of Nebraska being down and held the advantage there, and they were the better program than Nebraska for a substantial period of time, even though Purdue wasn't one of the best programs in the country by any stretch. But there was a stretch where arguably Nebraska was among the worst Power 5 programs in the country. They weren't winning games. They weren't going to bowls. They were just there. And that is changing. Like, Matt Rhule is going to change that. I don't know if Matt Rhule is going to make this a playoff team ever, but he's going to make them back into respectable. And Purdue now, this is a kind of matchup where it is trying to say we're still in that conversation too. And the way the past 2 games color how we're going to look at that, but just in a vacuum, this is the kind of game where they have to line up and show that they're still at this level. We wanted to talk about something that was in the news this week and about how it does or doesn't affect Purdue. As people probably saw, there was a situation at UNLV. The quarterback there, Matthew Sluka, announced like in the middle of the night that earlier this week that after 3 games, he's taking his red shirt and he's going to transfer. Team players can play in up to 4 games and still use a red shirt for that season. He's going to use his red shirt for this season and transfer because UNLV, in his interpretation, was not following through on the NIL commitments that it had made to him. And then there was another one, a guy named Bear Alexander, it's a great name, defensive lineman for USC, also announced that he's going to redshirt and make his transfer. Those are 2 different circumstances. Right. One is directly related to not coming through on NIL stuff. Bear Alexander, he started his career, he was a 5-star prospect, started his career at Georgia, played in all 12 games for the 2022 national champs, I think. Transferred to USC, believe played there last year.
He was pretty good last year, actually. Yeah.
He played there last year, and then now I don't know what exactly is pushing him out the door. I would think that if Lincoln Riley wanted him to stay and there were NIL situations there, they would figure it out. So this may just be him not enjoying where things are for USC. I don't know. I haven't actually looked into that.
I read a story this morning about it. I saw this come out last night, but it sounds like he was playing predominantly last year. He was, a guy that was very productive for the defense. And Lincoln Riley said, it must have been yesterday, or I guess it would have been yesterday based on when I read it and what time it was in LA when I read it. This is a non-story is what he said. Here's a guy he's done okay for us. He's pretty good. We were mediocre on the defensive line last year, and now we've upgraded. So he's not playing as much. And it's almost like Lincoln Riley just shrugged his shoulders and goes, okay, if he wants to leave, that's not a big deal to us. So it seems like this is more stems from playing time, where it's a guy that expected to be a big time player, and
Yeah.
probably parlay that into getting drafted in the draft, and now doesn't see that happening with the amount of playing time he's getting.
Yeah. So obviously the natural question here is Purdue's about to play its fourth game. I think there will probably be maybe some redshirt decisions on the table. They haven't been playing a lot of true freshmen, I don't think, other than Teron Grant and Shamar Rigby, right? Like I can't think of other true freshmen who have played. I suppose Porath also a true freshman who's been
Right.
playing every game. But those weren't guys I think that were redshirt mix anyway. Redshirt's very common for offensive line and defensive line, less common in modern football the farther away you get from the ball. But I guess the question is like, how soon does Purdue have a situation like this? They certainly wouldn't be immune to it. If they were to get like blown out by Nebraska on Saturday, does it put them in a situation where there's somebody on this roster who decides, hey, I've only got 1 year left and this isn't going anywhere? And especially if maybe they're not playing and the role isn't what they thought, do they do the same thing? Do they take a red shirt if they've got one still available and go in the portal? I guess my answer to that would be that might be a thing that happens to Purdue. I don't know that sounds to me like a problem. That sounds to me like a guy you don't want to be around anyway. But the reality for Purdue is it can't lose too many talented people because the results would say they don't have an abundance of them.
Yeah, and we're not going to speculate on who may or may not do this.
Right.
That's not why Nathan brought up this question. But these things tend to become a trend when somebody steps up. Right after Sluka did it, a third or fourth string running back from UNLV also said, "Hey, you know what? I don't have the role at UNLV that I thought I would after transferring from North Carolina State. I'm also going to redshirt and enter the transfer portal." And and then Bear Alexander does it. So I could see a lot of guys now being like, okay, somebody was the first person to come forward and do this. Maybe some guys didn't even realize this was something you could do, where you could just opt to take a red shirt this season and have played 3 or 4 games, and then say you're going to enter the transfer portal after the season. That gives you a lot more time to see how the season plays out, see how you fit with programs, do your research, because a lot of times in the transfer portal, guys enter it 2 or 3 days later, they're making a decision and going somewhere else. Sluka's situation is different. Sounds like, at least in his mind, he was promised a X number of dollars to transfer to UNLV and play quarterback, and is not getting what he thought he was promised. Now it does sound like this was a verbal agreement, which I don't know why in this day and age anybody would just verbally agree to accept something and transfer to a school with all of the parameters that are involved with NIL now. But UNLV side of the things is like, that's not what was promised. He didn't have an agent at the time of transferring here and went out and got one after his stock elevated after UNLV started 3-0. So now he's got some room to negotiate maybe a little bit. And at least in Barry Odom's mind, it's like, we're not going to negotiate with somebody mid-season, and we're going to pay everybody what we're going to pay them. But it will become a thing in college football where we're seeing this more and more, I think, especially the NIL disputes, as guys go out and produce and feel like they're worth more money mid-season, just because that's kind of the thing you've created with NIL.
There's a lot of he said, she said here, and there's things like that are kind of circumstantial to me. It's like, okay, yeah, he went and got an agent after 3 games. Maybe it was because UNLV is like in the top 25 now, and people are reaching out to the quarterback with NIL opportunities, and he's like, well, I need somebody to handle this now. I wasn't expecting this. I was at Holy Cross last year. This wasn't supposed to happen. So there's a lot here, and because it's all, I am very much on the side. I stand up for the concept of player compensation. It was always a framework that I thought was patently ridiculous. That this group of people has an open market and can make millions and millions of dollars. The very few people, the coaches, and this market over here, the guys who are actually going out and having their brains bashed in, are dictated as to what they can have. I thought that was always, that disparity was not fair to me. But I also think it can be true that the way that we're doing it is a fiasco. And when you have no structure, when you have no accountability, like, okay, yes, he didn't have anything in writing. We've also seen places where I think they have had things in writing and the collective still like reneges on the deal. Like and there's no consequences except the kid transfers. And you've also seen situations where a kid will transfer and take the NIL money and then transfer out a few months later. Go ask people at Iowa how
Purdue was playing at Iowa the day that he transferred to Iowa, and that place did not care about a basketball game going on whatsoever.
Yeah. So that was Caden Proctor we're talking about, who's back at Alabama. So I'm just saying, like, there's a lot right now that until you put a structure around it and actually put some accountability on the schools, on the athletes. But right now, it's this when coaches talk about it being the Wild West, they're not complaining really about the players getting compensation. They're complaining about no one is accountable to anybody, and it's just a big mess. And until they get that sorted out, and I know that there are 80s and coaches who think that the House settlement and the framework that's coming together off of that is going to settle this, but you still are just dictating terms to this group of people who don't have, across the board representation in this sort of thing, which is also a complicated subject anyway, because how do you put football players and cross country runners in the same organization and come up with the same rules that govern both of them? So there's a lot still that has to be figured out. But these sort of messier situations, like what's going on at UNLV, that's going to keep happening as long as both the school and the players voluntarily play fast and loose with this. And I think there's fault on both sides for something like that. So hopefully Purdue has taken a more sensible approach to this and maybe a wiser approach to this. I do think there are people at Purdue in place that maybe are giving this more oversight. And while that is sometimes going to either lose them a player or not get them a player, you also may avoid some of this mess. It's kind of a give and take.
Yeah. Before we jump into basketball here, because I had, after the Oregon State situation, did anybody have questions? And got a lot of kind of the same question. The general consensus kind of those questions was either what is Graham Harrell's buyout? Is Graham Harrell getting fired? Something along the lines. Everybody was, kind of this. Yeah, the offense was bad, and now you got to fire the offensive coordinator. Graham Harrell's under contract through next season, and he's making $1 million next year if he's still at Purdue. $950,000 this year. I would think, unless things get worse, that he's going to be here for the duration of that contract. That's my belief. And the head coach is, I don't think Ron Walters is on the hot seat at all right now in year 2. Generally, you give those guys 4 years, unless it's really getting out of hand. So I would expect, maybe let the season play out a little bit before you just kind of react to something like that. But people are not happy with the offense right now, obviously.
Well, they have good reason to not be happy with the offense, obviously. But as far as the answer of the Harrell situation, listen, if you fire someone like that or even demote them, who is taking over as the offensive coordinator at that point? Who on the staff has the background to be an offensive coordinator? Let's take the names off of it. Let's just talk about any team. Who do you then promote to be the offensive coordinator at that point? And I don't know that there's an obvious answer for that on this coaching staff. He's also your quarterback's coach. So if you were firing him, you'd essentially be getting rid of 2 coaches. And I know that there's other, lower level like analysts and quality control people that are involved here, and you can promote those guys. Sometimes you have someone on your staff who has a background as a coordinator and a very veteran guy. That's a lot of times guys will get fired from a job, and while they're still making money from that job, they go be an analyst somewhere and wait for the next really good opportunity to come up. We'll see that, or it's something that older coaches do later in career. But I just don't see. I mean, unless I'm wrong, I have to study it more. But I don't see that dynamic sitting there waiting for Purdue. I think this would have to be a postseason reassessment and reevaluation of things. But I do think that, again, like I said before, we're getting to a very critical juncture of the season where the team is what it is. There's not a lot you can do with this team. You can't go get street free agents and just bring them in. And it's not like NFL teams do that to like go win more games. It's kind of to fill gaps. You can't, you've got other, you've got an 85 scholarship roster, but you came through an entire preseason in 3 games and other guys weren't playing more for a reason. So unless there are guys in this freshman class that need to be on the field sooner, and you're going to take a leap on a higher talent ceiling as opposed to their production right now, I don't know what I think there's, to some extent, this coaching staff has to re-scheme some things and figure out a way to succeed with the talent it has. And especially as it relates to the passing game, whatever plan it came into the last 2 games with was completely deflated by the end of the first quarter in both games. And if that happens again on Saturday, there's the alarms have to be going off, because that is not something that you can just keep. And going back, there was a stat in the Notre Dame game that they showed on the broadcast that, what was it? Purdue was like last in the country in first quarter scoring over the past, since Ryan Walters got there. I can't remember what the exact stat was. I should go back and find it. But it was basically that this team just its offense doesn't get going in the first quarter, like, almost ever. And again, take out Indiana State or whoever, like any FCS that they ever play, I don't care what happens in those games, and because unless it's somehow, especially if it doesn't demonstrably translate to these other games, what are you doing against Big Ten opponents and peer opponents in other conferences? They're just not coming out ready to execute on offense, and that was evident. And I know that they were executing before they made mistakes against Oregon State, but it's the mistakes negate the success. So it's on a lot on Graham Harrell right now, and a lot on Ryan Walters and Kevin Kane to figure out the scheme on both sides that's going to let this talent, what talent they have, to give it a chance to succeed.
Yeah. Let's, for time's sake, maybe translate into a productive offense, and that would be Purdue basketball. So, one of the best offensive teams in the country last season.
Well, hold on. We should mention that. Should PJ Thompson be the next offensive coordinator of Purdue football? Could he do both?
I don't know if he's got any football background, so
I don't believe. Maybe at his younger days.
Not a very big guy, so
no. But nobody's very big in like Pop Warner.
That's true. Either way, we saw the Purdue basketball team earlier this week, and I think we've seen 3 solidified positions as far as probably starters already, who are the 3 guys returning from last year, that being Trey Kaufman-Renn, Braden Smith, and Fletcher Lawyer. But the thing that struck me during that practice was just guys on the ground wrestling over loose balls, guys getting up off the floor to check to see if they're bleeding. It seemed like very much like it was the first practice, but it wasn't really the first practice. It was the first official practice of the 24-25 Purdue basketball season. But this looked like a championship caliber team just in the way that it approached what was a standard practice. I thought that was kind of tremendous to watch, and having seen a lot of Purdue practices over the years, it's not surprising. But this is day one, and you have your best player diving headfirst into another player trying to save a ball from going out of bounds in a pickup 5-on-5.
Yeah, very, very physical, very spirited practice, very high energy. I should say Caleb First wasn't there. He was out with just a temporary illness that day. But so you're missing somebody from that big man kind of rotation. But just across the court, I thought it was really competitive. And Matt Painter was saying that, they've got 3 returning starters, obviously, right? With Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Renn and Fletcher Lawyer. And those 3 guys, early in the summer, they were trying to really split those guys up, because to put all 3 of those guys on one team would have been kind of unfair and almost like counterproductive. You want to be able to get like a back and forth going. But Painter told me that like over the last, 6-7 practices, dating back into later in the summer, that he has put those guys together. And it's both that, yes, you're kind of building some momentum for those guys going into the season, playing together and getting that in sync again. But then it also, you take this other group now, and it's Miles Colvin, and it's the freshmen, guys like that, and putting them up against the more veteran, established guys, and making them have to compete to stay at that level, or to prove that they're at that level. And the practice that we saw on Tuesday, Painter said, was as close as they've come to beating them. It really came down to like one turnover at the end of that scrimmage that they do at the end of practice, or that younger group had a chance to knock off the older group. And I think that is an important dynamic to try to build within your team, to like say, you have to go earn this, and then reward them when they show that they are earning it, show they are stepping up. Matt said something to me after practice, which is like, if you've got two really good teams on your team, then you've got a great team potentially. And that's the dynamic that they're starting to feel building here. This isn't predictive of anything. I think this is going to be a really fun season to watch how this all comes together, but they are sort of quietly getting excited about the fact that internally things are going to be really, really, really competitive for minutes. And I think what's unique about this team, maybe not unique, but unique compared to the last two seasons, is the how versatile the entire team might be. That this team's identity, last two seasons at least, and really going back before that, your identity was like, you've got a redwood in the middle under the basket. Sorry, I just came back from the Pacific Northwest, and everything operates off of him. And they've been doing that for a lot of Painter's tenure, obviously. And now I think, and I sort of wrote something for IndyStar.com and JCOnline.com earlier this week about this. I think Trey Kaufman-Renn is the identity is still based around your big man, but your big man's not a big man. And now the identity is sort of based on the versatility and adaptability and the matchup problems that you can create by using someone like Trey Kaufman-Renn to change what you are to best take advantage of whatever opponent is against you that night.
Yeah, and this is kind of going off of that. 2 seasons ago, the one game that Zach Edey missed during this whole run of back-to-back National Player of the Year, he was out sick, and it was a mid-major opponent. I can't remember off the top of my head who Purdue played that night, but
was it like Idaho or something?
I think it was a blue team, but Trey Kaufman-Renn went off. He, there was no Edey. He had 24 points. He looked like, man, why is this guy not playing more? Because at the time, he wasn't playing a whole lot. He redshirted, and then he was playing sparingly that redshirt freshman year. And then last year as a starter, he was almost just kind of, he was better offensively than Caleb First. And I think that was kind of what Purdue was trying to get more offense out of the start of the gate with him on the floor. But I don't think and all this time, dating back to 2 years ago, Matt Painter said Trey Kaufman-Renn will be an all Big Ten player before he leaves here. And you're wondering when that's going to happen. Now is that opportunity where he's shown in flashes what he can do. Purdue really tried to establish him last season, starting the second half of a lot of games, just to get him in the flow, because when you're trying to win the game, you're just going to throw it to Edey and let him either score or kick it back out until he can score. You're right. I think Trey Kaufman-Renn is kind of an X factor to the whole success of this season, but I think he's capable of having a tremendous leap statistics-wise and being a reason that Purdue wins, possibly 25 plus games.
It was New Orleans that he did that against, by the way. I don't know why I was throwing out names. I wasn't here. I'm just throwing darts at a board blindfolded. Idaho came up some other way this week in Purdue sports. I can't remember, but that was on my brain. Last year he averaged, I think, 6.4 points, 4 rebounds. And Matt Painter on Tuesday says, I'd be shocked if he wasn't a Big Ten. I think he said if he wasn't an all Big Ten caliber player. That's an important nuance to throw on there, because you can be a Big Ten caliber player and just not get voted.
Especially with 18 teams now. So
yeah. Oh, that's a very good point, Sam. I remember back in the day, like he was like apoplectic that Dakota Mathias wasn't one of the top 15 on the all Big Ten team. And it's like, okay, well, was he 16th by 1 point? Like whatever. But that he thinks that there is going to be, exactly that jump in production, and that it's not just based on the fact that he's going to play more. I think they see things in his game that he has worked to get better at. He was not been a very good free throw shooter. He worked on that over the offseason. He's been an okay 3-point shooter, but I think he sees the more he's going to play and the more times he's going to be in that very, very favorable matchup against whoever they decide to defend him with, then he has he needs to capitalize on that opportunity. He's talking about he needs to be better running the floor. He worked a lot on that in the offseason. He thought early in his career he would get a little too winded and wasn't as dynamic enough as a guy just running the floor. He wants to be better there. He worked on his lateral movement because he wants to be, a better defender. He's going to have to defend a wider variety of guys. But all these are things that he thought about and implemented in the offseason because he knows the opportunity that is in front of him here, that he's, took a red shirt because of the injury and he came off the bench for an entire season. And then he started every game last year, but he's the little shrub in the shadow of the redwood, right? Maybe like an oak tree in the shadow of a redwood. But regardless, yeah, I think that he just seems to me, as I've observed this team now for the past couple months, like he jumps out at me as like maybe being the critical hinge of, like I said, this team's new identity will be that its identity can shift to its own desires. And I think that's going to be the important thing, because everyone says like, well, we can adapt, but like, are you adapting reflexively to what the other team is succeeding with? Or are you dictating the terms of the battlefield that night? Are you the one that's coming out and saying, we're going to play this small lineup against you and make you change to stop that? We're going to play this big lineup against you and stop you defensively or make you adjust to that. Are you the one that's setting the terms? And I guess the actual answer is you get to do both. It helps you stop the bleeding when another team's having success, and it may be the thing that you can use to put another team against the wall the way you want to.
Yeah, and speaking of Redwoods and the team that was opposing the Boyer Smith Kaufman Wren team the other day, I thought Will Berg was tremendous. In the time that I was out there, I missed a portion of the practice for kind of some breaking news stuff and the Gene Katie thing I was kind of chasing during that practice, as you know.
Gene Katie had a slight stroke, but is doing well, yes. They say.
But I thought Will Berg was really good. And Daniel Jacobson to a degree too. But Will Berg is a guy that we don't know a whole lot about because he would come in late in blowouts last year and go. I mean, his offensive efficiency was just ridiculous how high it was early in the season, because he would come in and just clean up at the end of games and score 6 points in a minute and a half. And he played behind Zach Edey, which I assume benefits him. Having gone through the wars for 2 years against him every day in practice, but he's never really been given an opportunity to go out and thrive because Zach Edey was playing 37 minutes a game. So that's a guy that's another guy when you're talking about, just reasons why Purdue could not have the drastic fall off that people may assume. It could be the reason. I kind of wrote this back in the summer. Purdue has a problem at center, but it's not the problem you think. The problem isn't Purdue lost Zach Edey. It's now you got all these different versatile kind of guys. How do you mix and match that rotation to not equal what Edey did, but still find that success in the paint?
Yeah, it's not about matching Edey's production. What he did in the post is more than what most teams get out of their collective centers in any game.
Right.
But I think it is about how do the pieces you have make this team most effective, is what I was saying before, just about the up and down versatility that this team will have. By the way, that's, to me, sounds like a very interesting team to take into an NCAA tournament, where you have just a variety of things that you have to adapt to quickly. You don't know who you're playing 2 games later, and you have to, can that be an asset there? I'm kind of thinking, listen, the ultimate asset was Zach Edey. Let's not pretend. Like, if they could have Zach Edey for another year, they'd be pretty excited about it. They're not saying, boy, this is better than Zach Edey, but it is what it is, and I think you have to try to make it the best version of it. But Berg is someone I think could be critically important, because Kaufman-Bren's not going to play the 5 exclusively, obviously. He's going to play both. That's the whole point. But when he's not, when you want to play him as at the 4, which is obviously his more natural spot, then you're still going to be putting a conventional big at the 5. And if Berg is, does what he's supposed to do in limited opportunities with getting the ball under the basket and stuff, that's great. I think if he's an excellent screen setter, if he's an excellent passer out of the low post and keeping the offense in flow, and he's excellent at like setting where he needs to be defensively, not necessarily a rim protector, but like being a defensive presence down there, then I think that goes a long way to, again, just helping this team match up the way it wants to match up with any given opposing lineup. And like same with Daniel Jacobson, because Matt Painter brought up that, he needs to, get a little bit bigger, get a little bit stronger, learn things a little bit better, get a little bit more efficient around the basket, scoring the ball, because like they need to get him there. They've got another couple months or less than 2 months before the season starts, 50 days, 40 days, whatever it is. They need to help get him there because his rim protection is such a weapon. They need to have that on the floor. They need to have that weapon at their disposal. It can't be, a theoretical thing that if you put him out there, maybe he can do it. I think he needs to be able to go out there and stay on the court at both ends and be efficient and useful at both ends to fully make them able to take advantage of that shot blocking. But they see it already. I mean, he is 7'4", but they see it already as a true freshman that he can walk on the floor and be a difference maker there. Braden Smith, I think it was Braden Smith that told me this, said, well, I think maybe it was Kaufman. I can't remember. Maybe it was Kaufman said, I think he can be better defensively than Zach was. But when you're talking about defense too, don't forget you're talking about defensive rebounding. And that isn't just being tall. There's a lot that goes into that. So that's also strength, positioning, knowing, just having an awareness. Like all those are things that Daniel Jacobs is going to have to come along with to be anywhere. He may never get to a Zach Edey level of rebounding, but if you get pretty good there, and then you're also a great shot blocker, we've seen it before at Purdue, how much that can mean to a team.
Yeah. One of the interesting quotes that Matt Painter had after that practice, when I had asked about, kind of the competitiveness and equality and talent that he had on two teams going head to head, was, Purdue didn't get better at recruiting over the last 10 to 15 years when it's had this incredible run of success. It's gotten better at evaluating recruits. So now Purdue is, I think we've seen it. It's you graduate a guy and it's almost a guy with a very similar skill set that comes in and takes a scholarship once that player is gone. You're seeing a lot of the same pieces. And, as Painter said, people think, well, you went to the national championship. Now you can go out and get a better player. And he said, no, I want to go get the same players that got us to the national championship. So I think this staff, and it helps that there's been a lot of, these coaches have been retained for a while. It's just a tremendous trust and kind of an idea of what Purdue is looking for year in and year out. Not going to go into the portal unless it has to, which the last 2 years Purdue has gotten a fifth-year guard to add some ball handling, depth, shooting, whatever it might be. But Purdue's going to do its due diligence, recruiting high schoolers for the most part, and trying to find program guys. And it's, I wrote this during the NCAA tournament. It's an old school approach, but Matt Painter is proving that an old school approach can still work during the NIL era. I don't know how long, because Matt Painter also said this is going to bite me in the ass eventually. But right now it works.
And actually, one of the guys I wanted to talk about, I think sort of epitomizes that a little bit. It's not like he's a low-level recruit, but Raleigh Burgess was a top 150 prospect. I think he was a 4-star per the 24/7 composite. So a really solid player, but he's within your, your radius that you're trying to own, right? He's like Cincinnati area kid. And Matt Painter was really sounded very excited about him. When we talked to him Tuesday, there was something happened right in front of me it was just like a drill that they were doing. It was like a 5-on-air kind of drill. They were just running through some mock offense stuff, and he came down and like hit a 3 at the back of a play, and Matt Painter was like, yeah, good job, Raleigh. He was like really getting into him, or in a good way. And after the thing, he said, Raleigh Burgess has looked really good. Where he ends up in his first year, I don't know yet, but he's looked really good and been very productive. And then now you start to just like, on top of what is already a sound structure and a sound nucleus. I know they lost however many pieces they lost, but still a sound nucleus already here. I feel like he gets a little bit forgotten because when you're bringing in a 7'4" guy like Jacobson in the same class, it's easy for a guy who's like whatever he is, 6'10", to get forgotten a little bit. And maybe he's not going to be a pure big man like Jacobson is, blocking shots and all that stuff. But Painter seems to think that like he's gotten off to a really strong start. And if there are freshmen coming in, because we've already heard them be very complimentary of someone like Jakari Harris. Like when you start bringing freshmen in who are forcing their way onto the floor for real minutes right away, it's another thing that sort of raises probably the floor and the ceiling for this team.
And kind of to that point, CJ Cox, another guy I was impressed with the other day, wasn't somebody Painter was even recruiting. He went to recruit somebody else, saw the attitude and the way that he interacted with teammates and kind of what he was doing at an AAU game, and was like, why am I not recruiting this guy? So what's he do? He goes and says, hey, I'm Matt Painter. I'm the head coach at Purdue. And lo and behold, CJ Cox ends up a part of this recruiting class. So that's very much what you want, is kind of the puzzle pieces to fit, right? The right character guys. And you can't miss too many times on character, or you're going to have a situation you don't want. And for the most part, Matt Painter has hit home runs on not only talented players that fit Purdue's structure, but also high character players, I feel like, at least here in the last 5 years anyway.
Anyone else you want to hit on before we sign off for today?
I think it's going to be pretty exciting. I am happy that Purdue is in a month going to be playing at Creighton, even though it's an exhibition game. I think that game at Arkansas as an exhibition last year did wonders for Purdue, because Purdue lost that game and really probably exposed some things that if you're playing, whatever Division II team or whatever traveling circus show teams that do those tours, you probably don't learn a whole lot about yourself. And I think Purdue learned tremendously going on the road in a hostile environment, and also playing a team that had as much talent or close to as much talent as you do.
I'm going to be interested to see how this team, bounces back when things maybe don't go its way this season. Because I think last season you would, they lose the game at Ohio State when Ohio State hadn't been doing anything, and you lose a couple other games, or you lose that exhibition. But you wake up the next morning and you still got Zach Edey, and you still know that is like an unstoppable force for a lot of opponents. And this year they don't have that. Right. But I think it's also a team that brings enough people back that were in the Final Four last year, 3 guys who were starting in the Final Four, who are going to be like, so I think it gives Matt Painter the freedom to go to Creighton and coach that game exclusively as a pressure test teaching situation, right? Like, you want guys to go out there and compete, but you can base all your coaching decisions in that game off what's better for you in March than worrying about how your team's going to react to maybe losing a game like that. And I think that's going to be true. Obviously, then once real games start, you have to play to win. But that's one thing I don't know yet about this team. Like, there are things I think I know about this team just from seeing them a few times. That's one of the things that I don't know yet, is just like the emotional composure of the team. But my inclination is that they're going to be in a pretty good place for that. Just the way that people like Braden Smith, Trey Kaufman-Renn talk about the confidence that they come into this season with.
Yeah. So 2 years in a row now, Purdue has gone to Northwestern as the number 1 team in the country and lost. Yeah. And the attitude and the way that the players interacted with media after each of those 2 games, completely different. 2 years ago, it was kind of like, you're on this high that you're the number 1 team in the country now. And it's like, we lost this game. Maybe we're not as good as we think. And then last year, and it was Fletcher Lawyer, went really into detail about what the mood in the locker room was like and things like that. And he said, nobody's even worried about this. We know what we have. We know we can win a national championship, and losing a game in December, whenever it was, at Northwestern doesn't change that. So I think, and now you've seen, Fletcher Lawyer, Trey Kaufman-Renn, Braden Smith, guys who have been at Purdue for 3 or 4 years, being the leaders of that group. I think it's going to take more of that kind of mindset where it's like, listen, nobody goes undefeated in college basketball anymore. It hasn't happened since 1976, and probably with the parity today will never happen again. So it's how you take those losses and get better so that you don't lose the last game of the season.
Yeah, I would have said this in 2019 when I left, because it was the last game I covered back then was the Elite Eight loss to Virginia. And some Purdue team had to break through just to help the psyche of everyone, from like the oldest and youngest fans to people at Purdue. Like, you had to just like get that thing and check off that box. And now the stakes of everything, every single loss, don't seem as big, because when you're the number one team in the country, finally, which is a thing that Purdue hasn't experienced all that much in its existence, and then goes out and then loses, you feel maybe like, oh, we just let something, we let people down. We maybe, and you have that self-doubt, right? And I think that now, once you've gotten there, not only that you've proven you can get there, you can also know that when you got there, the team that was waiting for you was a team that had lost, like, how many games did NC State lose last year and still got to a Final Four? And you get a new perspective on things. So I think that it helps propel this team into the season to have that at its back. And I think it gets to have now it's about creating, again, like, its own identity. What will this team be remembered for? Not just in terms of wins and losses and how far it advances, but in terms of just how it played and what its style was, what its identity was. And I think it's going to be a fun several months, because we get to kind of watch it happen organically, because I don't think it's set in stone yet. I think it's something that's it could go in a few different ways, and we get to watch it unfold, and we are excited about that and grateful for that. And we're grateful for all of you who watched and listened today. For Sam King, I'm Nathan Baird. I will not be at Saturday's game, unfortunately, but Sam will be there. I assume he may throw something at you post game, some kind of commentary. But if not, we will be back on Boilers Extra middle of next week before Purdue heads up to Wisconsin. See you later.